The president of South Africa unveiled a big tribute to Nelson Mandela this morning. A new statue now stands outside the buildings where Mandela served as South Africa's first democratically elected president.
The new tribute follows yesterday's funeral in Mandela's home village of Qunu. More than 4,000 guests and dignitaries attended the traditional service. Gayle King was among those invited by the Mandela family, and she's in Johannesburg. Gayle, good morning. We miss you, but I know, wow, what a moment in history to be there. Tell us about it.
You are so right, Nora. You know, and hello to you too, Charlie. I will never, ever forget the last 48 hours. You know, we gathered in Qunu. It was a time to mourn, to reflect, to celebrate the life of Nelson Mandela. And it was so fitting that it would happen in the village that meant the most to him, the place he loved more than anywhere else in the world. Those closest to him say that's where he learned his leadership skills there from the tribal chiefs. As you might expect, the services ran a little longer than expected, but nobody really complained about that. You know, we heard from someone who was one of his cellmates, Ahmad Kathrada, who said, "There's a void in my life. I don't know where to turn." We heard from one of Nelson Mandela's 18 grandchildren who spoke for the family. And we heard from someone who I thought, I love this saying, that the song is over, but you don't forget the melody. You know, when we first started the funeral, they said, listen, we're going to stick to time because he has to be in the ground by noon. That, of course, did not happen because they said you need more than 2.5 hours to lay Nelson Mandela to rest, but nobody complained about the length of the service, nobody.
And Gayle, there in the front row, his two former wives, almost side by side.
And you know, that's the thing, Charlie, that was so striking to everyone. Winnie Mandela and Graça Machel, who was his widow, walked in hand together. They have spent most of this past week together, I have to say. You know, and things haven't always been so good between the two of them, but they put all their differences aside this past week. We were invited to the home 2 days ago and spent time with Graça Machel. When I say we, it was Oprah Stedman, her partner, who's been her partner for many years, and Forrest Whitaker. And at one point, it was just the four of us in the room with Graça Machel. And we were asking her how she felt, and she said, you know, I'm still trying to process it. The week that he died, she said he'd had a very rough week. Wednesday and Thursday, he rallied, and, you know, everyone thought he was better. And the doctors came to her very late Thursday evening and said, you better come. We feel that it's time. And she said, even when you're prepared, when the moment comes, you are not prepared. And she said, even now, she is still trying to process it.
You know, you couldn't be more dignified than she has been as his wife, as well as by his side when he was dying.
It is so true. I wanted to introduce to you Jerry Inzerillo, who you both know was with us last week. Jerry, too, is a family friend and was invited. And we were talking about the relationship between Winnie and Graça. One of the most touching things was to see them holding hands, and him and Winnie wiping Graça's tears away.
As they did to each other.
I will never forget that.
Yeah.
So, Jerry, how will you sum it up, these past 10 days? You know, I was watching one of the villagers in Qunu say, a big tree has fallen. That took me for a second because I thought, what a lovely thing to say about him.
It is a lovely thing to say, and if you can compare Madiba to a great tree, he was one of the greatest we ever had. But knowing his devotion to children, especially when he got out of prison, he would often say that the tiny seed carries the promise for the mighty tree. So Mandela would want children. It's their time now. So as I think even of my own 7-year-old daughter, it's their time to lead now. So the inspiration in his leadership has to bring many generations of new leaders. And the thing I was most touched about yesterday, as this dignified great man was laid into the ground, is it occurred to me that somewhere in the world, in some country, a baby is born that's going to be the next Nelson Mandela.
You know,
I get that. Go ahead, Nora.
Yeah, I was going to say, you did a great job on Face the Nation yesterday. It was good to see you there. And Bob said something on the air that it's not events that make history or timing, it's people who make history. And that's a good point, Jerry. What's going to go on in terms of continuing the legacy of Mandela there in South Africa and elsewhere?
Go ahead.
Well, I think there's two things, and there's protocols that were put in place because, you know, even as far back as 1993 when President Mandela won his Nobel Peace Prize prior to being president, he said, you know, it's not about me, it never has been. It has to be about the future generations. And that was the beginning of setting up the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. Then when he felt that the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund had that protocol in place, he widened it to to set up the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which had to do with women's rights, reconciliation, having people get along. At yesterday's burial was very, very sweet because you had over 20 different religious leaders of all faiths, all colors, honoring him, and that's the way he wanted it. He's really the ambassador. He's really the father of the Rainbow Nation, the global Rainbow Nation, not just South Africa.
And yesterday at the burial, I think it was very special. They had said that they were going to televise the burial. There were TV cameras there in place, shooting in all different directions. And right before the casket was to be lowered in the ground, I saw a family member say, "Cut, cut, cut now." But during the burial service, after his casket was lowered in the grave, the family members came one by one and walked around, and they took a piece of dirt and they took a flower and they laid it inside the casket. And then they invited heads of state to come and do the same. And then they laid out his tombstone, which is a very elaborate tombstone. I'm curious, Jerry, about what you think about that, because people who know him best say he would not have liked all this pomp and circumstance. Graça told us that night that he said to her, "When I go, just put me in the ground with a pine box and put a stone on it." And she told him, "If I die before you, that might happen. But if you die before me, that is not going to be the case." Do you think he would have liked all of that yesterday?
No, he would have said, no.
It was beautiful.
He said, why are you making such a fuss over me?
Jerry and Gayle, thank you so much. I mean, it's been a remarkable opportunity to see one of the great men of our time make his final journey to his home village.
So
and you both have helped us understand it. Hurry home, Gayle. We miss you.
I'm getting on a plane in 2 hours. I'll see you in the morning.